All right, so again, to solve by factoring, remember we're going to write our equation in standard form so that it's equal to 0. So it has to be in this form for us to solve by factoring. So it needs to be equal to 0. Then we're going to factor using whatever method we need to, and we're going to apply that zero product property to finish solving, where we set each group equal to 0. And then if a quadratic equation cannot be factored, it is called prime, and we would have to use a different method of solving, okay, such as solving by graphing. Okay, so looking at 25, our first problem, the first thing that we have to do is get everything to one side so that it's equal to 0. So that means that I'm going to have to start by subtracting 18 to each side. So that will give us x squared plus 7x minus 18 equals 0. And then I'm going to try to factor. So our a is 1, so that means that we're looking for two numbers that multiply to be the last term, add to be the middle term. So we'd have x and x. We're multiplying to get a negative, so we're going to have a positive number and a negative number. And then factors of 18 that will add to be 7 is going to be positive 9 and negative 2. Still equal to 0. And then now that it's factored, we set each group equal to 0. So x plus 9 equals 0, and x minus 2 equals 0. And then we're going to solve. So the first one we subtract 9. So that's going to give us x equals negative 9. The second one we have to add the 2, so we get x equals 2. So our two answers for this is negative 9, positive 2. So again, that means that it's crossing the x-axis twice, and those are the x-intercepts of our function if we're thinking about it in terms of a graph. All right, our next problem, so same thing, we're going to start by subtracting the 6 to each side. So we have 2x squared plus 4x minus 6 equals 0. And then this time I am going to start with the greatest common factor because these are all divisible by 2. So I'm going to factor out a 2. So that will leave us with x squared plus 2x minus 3 equal to 0. So now the a is 1. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to be the last term, add to be the middle term. So we're trying to multiply to be a negative. So again, I'm going to need a negative number and a positive number. And we would need to choose negative 3 and positive 1. So that way positive 2. So we need a positive 3 and then a negative 1 when we factor. Okay, so that's a minus 1. And then when it's in factored form, we're just going to set each group equal to 0. So we have this front group, so we would have 2 equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0, and then x minus 1 equals 0. Now this first one, this is just a false statement, so we're going to ignore it. So it doesn't affect our problem at all. The next one, we're going to subtract the 3, and then we're going to add the 1 for the last one. So I'm going to have x equals negative 3 and positive 1 for my two answers. All right, the next problem, so again, we're going to start by subtracting 8x to each side. So 16x squared minus 8x equals 0. And then we need to do the greatest common factor again. So I can factor out an 8x from each term. So that would leave us with 2x minus 1 equals 0. And since I no longer have a square term, we can't factor any further. So again, now we're just setting each group equal to 0 and solving. So 8x equals 0, and then 2x minus 1 equals 0. So for this one, we would divide by 8. So 0 divided by 8 is still going to be 0. The second one, we're going to have to add the 1 over. So we'd have 2x equals 1, and then divide by 2. So that will leave us with a positive 1/2 for the second answer. So that would be our final answer for that problem. All right, our next example. So we need it again in standard form. So we're going to have to simplify this. So that means that I'm going to have to FOIL this before we start. So we would have x plus 2 times x plus 2 equals 49. So x times x would be x squared. and then we would have a positive 2x, and then another positive 2x, and then 2 times 2 is 4, still equal to 49. Combine like terms, so x squared plus 4x, and then at the same time we can start subtracting our 49 over. So that will give us a negative 45 equals 0. So my A is 1, so we're looking for two numbers that multiply to be the last term, add to be the middle. So since I'm multiplying to be a negative, I'm going to need a positive number and a negative number. And we would need to choose positive 9 and negative 5. So that way we multiply to be a negative 45 and add to be a positive 4. So now to finish solving, we set each group equal to 0. So we're going to subtract the 9 and then add the 5. So our two answers will be negative 9 and positive 5. All right, next example. So again, we're going to start by adding the 15 over. So that will give us 2x squared minus 11x plus 15 equals 0. So we can't factor anything out. And since our A isn't 1, we either need to use our guess and check method or our grouping method. So I'm going to choose to do the grouping method. So we take 2x squared times 15. So that is going to leave us with 30x squared. And then we need factors of 30x squared that are going to add to be negative 11. So since we have to multiply to be a positive, add to be a negative, that means that both sets of factors are going to have to be negative. So we would want to choose negative 5x and negative 6x. That would multiply to give us positive 30x squared, but still add to be that negative 11. So now remember, after we figure that out, we are replacing that middle term with our new factors. So now we will have 2x squared minus 5x minus 6x plus 15 equals 0. And then we group our first two and last two terms together and then factor by the GCF. So from the first two we can factor out an x, and we would be left with 2x minus 5. In the second set we can factor out a negative 3, and again remember this one always has to be positive. So that will leave us with a positive 2x minus 5. And then next we're factoring out this entire group, so that 2x minus 5. And then we're left with the numbers in front, so x minus 3. And then just like before, we're setting each group equal to 0. So I'm taking 2x minus 5 equals 0, and then x minus 3 equals 0, and we are solving that. So for this one, we would have to add the 5 over. So that would leave us with 2x equals 5, and then divide both sides by 2. So my first answer is going to be 5 halves. And then the second one, we just have to add the 3 over to each side. So that will leave us with 3. So that would be my final two answers for that problem. Right, and our last problem. So I can't factor anything out. So again, we have to start by taking the first term times the last term. So 4x squared times 9 will be 36x squared. And then we need two factors that are going to add to be negative 12. So that means I need two negative numbers. So we're going to choose negative 6x and negative 6x to add to be negative 12. And then again, we're replacing that middle term. So 4x squared minus 6x plus 9. Group our first two together so we can factor out a 2x. And then we would have 2x minus 3. Okay, group our last two and we can factor out a negative 3. So that will leave us with 2x minus 3. And then our parentheses match, so we're going to factor that 2x minus 3 out next. And then we're grouping the numbers in front together, because that's what's left. And it looks like we have the exact same thing. So that means that we're going to have just one answer. So I really only need to solve one. So we're just going to take our 2x minus 3 and set that equal to 0. So we're adding the 3. So we would have 2x equals 3, and then divide by 2. So this time we would have one answer of 3 halves. So that means that if we're thinking about it in terms of a graph, the vertex of our graph is actually sitting right on the x-axis, which is why we only have one answer in this case. And that is going to conclude section 3.